So hello and welcome to the European Advocacy panel at the GCI Virtual Summit. My name is Katja Kowalski and I'm the head of strategy at VoltFAS, the London-based drug policy think tank. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel today and moderating it. And the panel primarily is going to be focused on how and where European advocacy is moving in the cannabis sector, but the discussion will primarily focus on some of the more nuanced issues surrounding cannabis reform, as we're all very well aware that cannabis reform is quite a complex and multifaceted field. And one of the major discussion points in today's panel will be around whether a major roadblock in European reform is the arbitrary distinction that we have been seeing with medical and recreational cannabis. We'll also be discussing what the changing face of advocacy is looking like, and particularly around what successful cannabis advocacy looks like in 2021. Europe's a particularly interesting jurisdiction, as there's certain countries that are advancing at quite an impressive pace in terms of cannabis reform, while others still face significant challenges. But certainly on the whole, we'll still see a number of roadblocks ahead to destigmatize the cannabis plant. And this is why I think discussing the distinction between medical and recreational cannabis is really important, as there's understandably quite a distinction between the two, particularly when cannabis is used to treat severely ill patients. However, the lines are often quite blurred between where recreational cannabis ends and where medical use begins. And as we see, Europe's beginning to experience a boom in the CBD and medical cannabis sector, but recreational cannabis sometimes can be somewhat left behind in this wave. So I think it's very important that we talk about how we can effectively address this and perhaps marry medical and recreational use under one umbrella. So as Europe slowly warms to the idea of cannabis with new voices, new arguments, new frames for support emerging, I'll be really interested to hear our panelists' views on how advocacy is evolving and whether this is being done successfully. And today I've got 5 brilliant panelists with me, all from different European jurisdictions representing different organizations. So I've no doubt that this will be an excellent discussion. We've got European-wide representation, and all of our panelists are members of the European Cannabis Advocacy Network, or ECAN, which is a platform for advocates to keep each other informed about reform developments. So it's a real pleasure to have you all involved in today's panel. And without further ado, let me introduce everyone. So our first panelist is Derek Bergman, who is a veteran Dutch journalist, photographer, and activist who's been covering cannabis culture for a range of media since 1994. He's one of the founders and current chairman of VOC, the Union for the Abolition of Cannabis Prohibition. And between 2010, and 2018, he coordinated the Cannabis Liberation Day, which is the biggest cannabis and hemp event in the Netherlands. And in 2019, he started High Tea with Derek and Rijns, which is the High Tea podcast, the first Dutch podcast about cannabis culture. And he's father to 3 sons and has been growing his own cannabis for over 25 years. Our second panelist is Gaby Kozar, who is a board member of ENCODE, the European Coalition for Just and Effective Drug Policies, since 2016. Gaby has a commercial background in consulting, trading, and management in Commonwealth independent states. And she's worked in education in Indigenous Latin American communities, along with training underprivileged young adults in professional careers. Gaby speaks German, English, Spanish, French, and Russian, and she's an advocate for drug policy, human rights, and sustainability. Our next panelist is Guido Silvestri, who is a board member of Volt Italia, the Italian chapter of Volt Europe, which is a pan-European party. And from a political point of view, Guido's focused on innovation, citizen empowerment, and the legalization of cannabis. And from a professional standpoint, Guido's interested and experienced, he's an experienced manager in financial services and new media industries, and most recently the founder and partner in innovative startup companies. Our next panelist is Nicole Lonergang, who is the founder of the Cork Cannabis Activist Network in 2016. and she founded this network to raise awareness about the benefits of cannabis, as well as the extensive harms that prohibition has been caused by in Ireland. And our final panelist today is Georg Wirth, who is the former tax officer and local politician for the German Greens Party. He's led the German Cannabis Association, or DHV, since its foundation in 2002. DHV is one of Europe's largest organizations calling for the regulation of recreational and medical cannabis. They've got over 160,000 Facebook fans and over 180,000 YouTube followers. So it has quite a significant social media following. And after winning the popular vote, Georg became the first cannabis lobbyist to speak to Angela Merkel about reform. And in 2014, Georg's reform campaign idea won €1 million on a televised show, which after that he launched Europe's first cinema spot campaign against prohibition. So those are all of our panelists today. So it's lovely to have you all on board. I've got 3 kind of sections of today's discussion. So firstly, I thought we'd have a bit of an introductory discussion around the current status of cannabis reform in all of your countries. So yes, I guess my first question to all of you is, what's the current state of cannabis policy and reform in your country? What do the current developments look like? Whoever would like to go first, the floor is yours.
I can break the ice. Okay, so we speak about Italy, of course. The situation is the following. Until today, the legalization of cannabis has been a battle that are not led by political parties. No political party is officially in favor of legalization. Some are just silent. Probably we can discuss later about the reasons. What happened recently is that there is a law proposal in the parliament. The parliament has never been discussing cannabis legalization in ages. And now there is a possibility to discuss a law not for the complete legalization, but for the domestic cultivation of cannabis, which is not enough, but it would be already a very important step, of course. The other, news is that recently Mr. Draghi named a ministry that also have a delegation on drugs, and the ministry want to call for the National Conference on Drugs, which is foreseen by the law in Italy, but has never been conducted. So the only fact to call this conference raised the debate, and it would be a very, very important step, of course, because what we need is 90% is information about cannabis, of course, in Italy. So I would say two important news. One is this law is now in the Justice Commission and will be discussed in the Parliament. So this is a big news. And the second is that we all expect the ministry to call for the conference. And of course, so I don't want to monopolize the discussion, of course, the political debate is very, very harsh already.
Sorry, it's interesting to do it after this information from Italy, because it's a little bit different. But first of all, let's say we had a big breakthrough on medical marijuana. Probably everybody knows that. We have legal medical marijuana, several products from the pure plant blossoms till pure THC, and many people who get this legally now. We are the biggest market in Europe for that kind of medicine. Still a lot to do, still a lot of problems, things to fix, like very high prices in the pharmacies, and doctors still not willing to prescribe and so on. But I think at the moment, currently we have more than 100,000 people getting cannabis as medicine. On the other hand, on recreational cannabis, I think we are one of the most repressive countries in Europe. We have many cases, police hassle without end, 200,000 police cases per year with cannabis, and more than 80% is against usual consumers, not dealers. So this alone is more than 180,000 police cases. And even if not everybody gets a fine, it still is something you have on your records and which can make you problems, including driver's license problems and several other things. And the third thing is, and here we come to the difference to Italy, we are close before breakthrough. It feels like we are, and we have a lot of discussions in the parliament. When Guido said there's no discussion at all about legalizing cannabis, well, we have that discussion since a couple of years, and we also have a lot of parties, meanwhile, in favor of legalization. We have 6 parties in the parliament, in the Bundestag, and 3 of them are clearly in favor of legalization. One, the Social Democrats, is almost there. They are making their program for the elections well last weekend, and they have cannabis in the program, saying at least there, well, let's say let's make communal model projects for giving out cannabis and so on, and decriminalizing people. So from the 6 parties, almost 4 are at least for very big reforms in cannabis policy, including recreational cannabis. And so everything depends on the outcome of the elections in autumn. But in every case, you all can think about Germany without Angela Merkel, that's for sure.
Between Germany and Italy, there's Austria. And from the beginning, it's very sad that we as European Union have different laws everywhere. That's something I don't really like. And in Austria, it's, on 10th of December, the Days of Human Rights, we launched a parliamentary citizens initiative for a humane drug policy to Austrian parliament. It's still on, and in June it will be decided if it's gonna be on for longer or not. And it's aiming for a permanent commission for drug policies, because it's something we don't have in Austria. In Austria, it's a very strange situation. You can buy seeds, you can buy clones. There's official shops, there are grow shops. There's CBD is legal, CBD weed is legal. But you're not allowed, you're allowed to grow the cannabis plants, but not for using them as drugs. You shouldn't use them as drugs. So as soon as they start to flower, you should not cut the buds from the plant and whatever. So it's quite weird. There's also for medicine, you can have dronabinol and Sativex, yeah. But dronabinol, it's a monosubstance, it's THC. And there's like a license you have for if you get cannabinoids prescribed by a doctor. And it's the same thing for all the cannabinoids. It's THC, CBD, whatever it says on the front. And on the back, it's just a warning, after you take that 8 hours, don't drive. So this is really weird, and it needs a lot of regulation and reform. Yeah.
So just in relation to cannabis for adult use that is not legal in Ireland, simple cannabis possession was added to the adult caution scheme last December. And what that means is that if someone is caught with a personal amount of cannabis, the amount which hasn't been defined by anyone in the country yet. So if you have no previous charges or convictions, you can avail of what's called a caution, which will avoid criminal proceedings. But in my opinion, it's kind of a shoddy halfway house between prohibition and decriminalization, because you still have to surrender your cannabis to be destroyed. You have to admit to an offence. The caution could be used against you in future court cases, and you won't be eligible for one if you have any previous charges or convictions. When it comes to cannabis for medical use specifically, legislation for the Medical Cannabis Access Programme was signed 2 years ago. The programme is still not active. It's not actually expected to be active until June of this year. It permits 3 specific conditions access to just 4 cannabis-based medicines. So MS, refractory epilepsy, and nausea and sickness associated with chemotherapy. They have access to 3 oils and 1 brand of capsules, only as a last resort. So for example, patients with MS, they'll be forced to endure high doses of drugs like Botox, tizanidine, and baclofen before cannabis-based medicines will even be considered, which is kind of reckless in my opinion. Now, There's been a licensing system in place in Ireland for a number of years, which means that anyone can go to their consultant and request to be prescribed cannabis-based products. And then the consultant will then apply for a license to prescribe these products. But the issue with this is that most consultants in Ireland won't even discuss cannabis. I actually have personal experience with this myself. I went to my consultant in regards to my chronic pain. I mentioned cannabis. He looked me up and down and walked out of the room. That was the end of that. And there's even some hospitals that actually have a policy in place that they will not discuss cannabis with patients as a treatment. So at the moment, under the licensing system, there's fewer than 80 patients who have access to medical cannabis products. Unfortunately, the prescription costs aren't covered in most cases, and this is leaving patients facing anywhere from 650 to 9,500 euro in prescription costs every 3 months. We really do have a long way to go in Ireland, because at the moment we're dealing with a government who aren't willing to engage with us really. And now we have a college of psychiatrists who are determined to prevent any access to cannabis in Ireland based on what they believe is cannabis causing mental health problems, when it's actually prohibition and contaminated cannabis products that are causing this. So yeah, long way to go in Ireland, unfortunately.
At least it's not as bad as Ireland. But it's not yet good. There are a few things happening. We had our big elections in March of this year. And we are right now in the formation, and it's going very, very slowly, like all cannabis reform is going as well. We have had 20 years of increased repression since about 2000 and are now finally moving away from that, but it's a tedious process. We have the weed experiment that has been announced in 2017, but not one plant has been planted yet. So this tells you something about how urgent they see it. At the same time, home growers are evicted from their house daily. I just last week visited one guy who had one plant that he grew outside in a public like forest, and he dried the plant for 1 day, and the police knocked on his door after that 1 day because the neighbors had complained, and he was evicted from his house, and he's still living on a camping. So you get these kind of horrible repressive stories, and at the same time also happening this week, really. One of the oldest and best coffee shops in the east of the country, they just threw in the towel because they couldn't stand the repression of the police and local authorities anymore. They were harassed all the time. The people that were getting the cannabis to the coffee shop, the infamous backdoor problem, it's resulting in violence, in terrible situations daily. People that transport the cannabis to the coffee shop, they get robbed by people with guns. The coffee shop owner cannot go to the police even to say this to the police, because he will be, he will get into trouble because of the cannabis. So you can say that we are moving in the right direction, but we still have these excesses every day. And I think speaking about cannabis activism, maybe going there already a bit, we have sort of proven that it's sort of possible to get the cannabis consumer out to the vote, because if you look at the results of the last elections, it's pretty good. We've heard some figures from other countries, the number of parties in Germany that are pro-legalization. Well, in my country, we have now 17 different parties in the parliament, 150 seats for 17 parties, but only 4 of them are against legalization. So 13 of them are pro-legalization. So you can see it's really a matter of time before we get there. But from an activist perspective, now is really the time for activism, because home growing is not included in any of the proposals here in the Netherlands, for instance. So we have to get that right. And also we have to prevent large companies from getting in. We have now the weed experiment, where there'll be regulated growing for around 80 coffee shops out of the 600 that we have left in the country, in 10 cities. We know that at least one of the 10 companies that are allowed to grow the weed for the shops is a foreign company. Maybe there's nothing wrong with it, but imagine that there'll be 5 Canadian or American companies responsible, for the backdoor of the coffee shops in the Netherlands. I would think it's a bit strange. So all these kinds of things are happening, but happening slowly. That's for now, I'd say.
No, thank you for that summary, and I think that just shows that it's moving in the right direction, or it's moving in a direction, but we need to make sure it's the right direction for kind of positive and sensible reform. That makes sense. But yeah, no, thank you all for that great summary. I think some of you've already touched on this, but I've got kind of a double-barreled question, both around what the current barriers you all think are kind of prevalent in Europe, and also what is it that, in your opinion, makes the cannabis space so difficult to navigate?
Sure, I'll get in there first. I suppose just to answer the question first on what makes the cannabis space so difficult to navigate, possibly its legal status and the stigma attached to it. I mean, those have got to be the two main things. At the moment, I think other barriers have to be the pandemic, because anyone that this issue is being brought to, they're saying, well, this is the priority, the pandemic is the priority. That's totally understandable. But as well, the stigma. And I have to say, personally, coming from Ireland, the lack of ability to critically analyze the data that's being put out by prohibitionists is a massive barrier, because I think there's this idea that these individuals behind these reports and statistics are infallible when they're not. We need to be able to recognize the way in which they bias. They come at these studies with bias, and they are manipulating data in order for it to fit their narrative. We need to call that out at every opportunity. It's not enough for us to say that it's wrong. We need to actually highlight why it's wrong, provide evidence proving that it's wrong, and share that information with as many people as possible. Again, I mentioned, the stigma attached to it. Anyone that this is being brought to, the main issue I'm coming up against is they hear cannabis, they think drugs, they think bad. And it's kind of being dismissed as this issue of people just wanting to get high. And I'm always saying that's not the case whatsoever. We just want sensible policy to be implemented, because at the moment, prohibition doesn't work. Everyone knows this. So we need to come up with a better strategy. I just feel like these psychiatrists and members of government, they don't see what's in front of them. They're content to blame cannabis for these issues, when it's actually prohibition that's causing the issues. It's contaminated cannabis. It's an unregulated market. It's no testing, no labeling. Why this is such an out there concept for them to grasp, I'm not understanding. And I just hope that they do eventually see that prohibition is the issue, not cannabis itself.
Well, I totally agree with Nicole. Thank you very much for mentioning this. It's the same problem everywhere, the prohibition. And how do people see cannabis? Cannabis is not a bad thing. Cannabis was always used and was legal. And then for some reason, it was illegalized. So we don't have to legalize, actually. We have to re-legalize. We have to come back to the roots and see the plant as what it is. It is a plant, and it's a plant that has benefits. If I grow sage in my garden and I consume too much, these toluenes, whatever is in there, it can harm me. St. John's wort can harm me if I take too much, but I'm allowed to do it. So what I think, why is it so difficult to navigate cannabis is, first, it grows everywhere. Everybody can grow it. So the big lobbies are the problem. They see there's a market. They want the monopolies. They want to lead the market. And now there's these licenses that are so expensive, so only the big companies can buy it. And the small growers, who are actually all the activists, who have the best knowledge, the best expertise for it, they don't have the money to get in, and that's the problem. There's no financial profit in it if it's done on a social and fair way.
The good thing I think about that is that indeed there is no profit, so there is no real lobby for, say, home growing. But on a human rights level, on a fundamental level, and this could work also for media if you get them to listen, this is the best point, For us as VOC, as organization, the right to home growing, it always precedes any commercial shop or whatever, even a cannabis social club. If it's your own apartment, if it's your own garden or balcony, the government has no business whatsoever to do it. So I think you can use that fact, and you can, at least for some of the politicians, you can convince them that you are sort of critical of big business, that you don't really want big time advertising, billboards advertising cannabis. You first of all want the fundamental right to grow your own medicine or your own therapeutical herb. You touched on that before, and it's indeed a very interesting discussion and debate. Is any use of cannabis medical? And I think the use of a word like therapeutical sort of solves it and bridges the gap between the two. Because I couldn't say whether I use my weed recreational or medical, but it makes me feel a lot better than when I don't use it. So for me, it's a therapeutical thing. But it's very hard for politicians to get to understand this, I must admit.
I think with regard to the barriers today that we have in front of cannabis legalization. And first of all, let me clarify, because I didn't do it at the very beginning. In Italy, medical cannabis is allowed, even if we have enormous problems, because a lot of sick people do not have enough product. So, but that's something we may mention later. In terms of what is the situation, I think that there are two aspects very clear in Italy, at least. One is the stigma, and means that people are ignorant in the good sense, of course, because in the 70s and 80s, drug was in all the world a very big problem, and nobody explained to people that cannabis is something very different from cocaine and heroin, of course. So if I cannot blame my grandmother, if you go to my grandmother and says, I want to legalize cannabis, and you see, what is that? It's a drug. So drug is death. So there are entire generation that grew up in ignorance, and that's a fact. So this is a course of action, of course, to inform people. And the second fact is that politics, I would say, the populist or whoever is interested to find enemies leverage on the cannabis as a fear. No? So in fact, they do the equation. Just today on the newspaper, the leader of our right party said we are against death. And of course, people do not know that nobody is dying for cannabis, even if abuse is harmful, of course. But people simply die more for nicotine and for smoking and alcohol. So it is so important to discuss it, because in Italy, the discussion in parliament, all the experts were in favor. And I would also like to mention the fact that there is a big difference in generation. Once you go in the surveys, it is clear that today the public opinion is 50-50 in favor and against legalization. It was 30% in favor 10 years ago, so it's growing. But if you go on the youngest generation, this is 60 or 70% in favor. And I just take another minute to mention something that concerns us as political party in particular. We usually let's say, try to form our policies starting from listening tours with normal people, of course. And I used to be the city lead for Rome. We used to do that. And we had different tables. And one was, what about security in our city, of course? No? And nobody was mentioning cannabis at all. And so I used to do something that we shouldn't do as table, let's say, manager, and I just asked it explicitly, what about cannabis? And everybody was saying, but this is not an issue. So for especially for young generation, this is not an issue, and I do agree, it is not an issue at all. So I think that also this fact about generation is so important, because once you know it, and once you see, I mean, you do the experience of cannabis, of course, you are able to distinguish between cannabis and the dangerous drugs.
If I could add to this is really has been the cornerstone of Dutch drug policy since 1976. From then on, we had a clear distinction in the law between, on the one hand, cannabis products, so hash and weed and everything that comes off the plant, and on the other hand, all the other illegal drugs like cocaine and speed and heroin. So this has been one of the great things about the Dutch policy, is that I myself, I was born in 1971 and this policy was introduced in 76. So I know very, very well that there's a big difference between cannabis on the one hand and those other drugs on the other hand. And I am very convinced that so many Dutch young people in that respect have been, let's say, saved almost by the coffee shop system. Because if you are curious to smoke some hash or some weed, and you can only get it at a dealer that has the full assortment of illegal drugs, of course you are more, there's a bigger chance that you will also try these other drugs. Whereas if you can go as a curious young person to a normal regulated place like a coffee shop, where they are very, very strict that there's never any hard drugs in there, because they will lose their license instantly for 3 months at least, or be closed down forever. That's a really, really important thing. And I think for all the European countries now going through the reform, this is the youth cards that you can all use. You know, I have 3 children myself. I'm really happy that they can go, if they want to buy it at a normal shop and not be, you know, introduced to all kinds of shit that I don't want them to use. And they know also for a fact that there's such a big difference between the drugs. And I know from a lot of people in foreign countries that are working in addiction care, because the police are so heavily involved in getting all the cannabis out, there's always hard drugs, but sometimes there's hardly any weed. And then they just see the people that usually buy the hash off the illegal market, then they go on to the other stuff. So there's your real gateway. The gateway is the police policing all the cannabis, so that there's nothing else left. So I think the youth card would be a good thing to get the politicians over to our side, because you are helping the criminals and you are really helping the dealers, and you are really making the access to hard drugs a lot easier if you don't have a regulated cannabis sales system.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, prohibition is definitely the main gateway rather than cannabis itself. It's the system that's in place at the moment.
Can I just add for 20 seconds? Sorry to jump inside, but I will not do it in the future. Just to remember that during the discussion in the parliament, the head of police in Italy was in favor. So he spent words in favor of legalization, because it is clear that this would free the resources of police to go after more important crimes. So it is something that is clear also, even if, of course, they are very prudent in doing this statement. But I think that the point of that is it's so important to distinguish between drug and other substances. This is something that didn't happen in Italy, in the public opinion, for the oldest generation yet.
Yes, when I heard this question, what makes a cannabis space so difficult to navigate, I thought, well, is it so? And I don't think so. I never thought it's especially difficult to navigate. In the 90s, I cared about several political issues, and there are others at least as difficult to navigate. In the cannabis space, there were not many people around caring about it, just a handful of people who really, like, it's their main issue or something, who are really people influencing the whole issue. And it's very easy to learn and all know very fast. So I always thought, well, that's not so difficult. And also the arguments are all on our side. With other issues, you can say, well, this argument is for this side and this for that side, and well, let's see. And cannabis legalization is a no-brainer if you look on the data. That's quite clear that this is the only right way to go to legalize. And I always thought, well, this is easier than other political issues. Maybe the only thing what makes it difficult is the fear. People, it was always difficult to get this to the point of a mass movement with millions and thousands of people on the streets and so on, because people did not want to be seen and bound with this issue because maybe they have some plants at home, or even only 2 grams. They are criminals, and they want to hide a bit and so on, and don't show their face for the issue. And it's still the case. We can mobilize, meanwhile, a lot of people. It is a mass movement kind of right now, but still you see it here and there that people still are hiding a little bit, especially when you try to get celebrities into it. Like in the States, it was a big breakthrough, and all the Hollywood stars started to say anything about it and saying cannabis legalization makes sense for me. And that is still difficult to achieve in Germany, at least, probably in other countries also. But all the other things, well, not too difficult to navigate. But the barriers are there, of course. You have them in every issue. Like, for example, if you compare with climate policy or traffic, let's say we want a completely different traffic, all public transport, and get all the cars out of the game and so on, and save the climate. Well, that is difficult to navigate with many more people interested in and much more money involved against you. The car industry, for example, in Germany, well, that is powerful. And there is the legalization debate, there is not much money against it. It's the dealers. They are the only ones who want it like it is, who earn as it is. But they don't go to the politician and say, here, you've got 100,000 euros and look that they don't legalize. Well, I never heard about that. They have no lobby or something real organized, at least not. So it's easier. The barriers, I would say, first is police. So it was interesting to hear from Italy that the highest police guy there said legalization is nice. Here it's not so. Here police is with all the associations, police associations and so on, several different ones, and all against legalization, and they are everywhere. After you discuss something with experts, there's always one of them in the panel and always against legalization. So for me, this is the biggest barrier. But that's not a financial or money lobby or something like that. And the other thing is conservative policy and left policy. On the other hand, the left parties were the first who understood that legalization is the way to go, and it's the only thing that makes sense. Maybe because in former times it were the more left-leaning student movement and so on who were consuming. The same reason why they put pressure on it on the other side. And it's still the same game. In Germany, I said 4 of the parties want legalization, more on the left side, and the conservatives, I think now it's more like a reflex. We can't do it because it's an issue of the left side. It's a left issue somehow, but it isn't. Well, and it has nothing to do with law and order. Law and order is the main key issue for our conservatives, as they meanwhile don't know anymore what does conservative mean. What is conservative? But law and order, that's their issue. And so their first thought is, well, law and order and legalizing cannabis doesn't fit together. And that's something we have got to explain them, that legalization is law and order, and that what we are doing now is the opposite of law and order.
Well, Georg, I don't know in which country you are living. It's Germany. I don't know this Germany because I see, in not really in Europe. Yeah, in Europe there's different lobbies going against the movement of legalizing, because there are actions like confiscating seeds that are being sent to Germany. I know about that. Same happens in Malta. Same happens with seed companies in Spain, and things are really getting difficult. But to say there's no big lobby of dealers, as long as there is a war on drugs and people still die because of cannabis, because of consuming cannabis, like in Malaysia and in Asian countries, They have the death penalty for that. And then you look into the cannabis producing countries where all the cartels are, they are against legalization because they would not have this big profit. So we have a lot of movements against it. People don't understand that prohibition is actually working for these criminals. Prohibition makes them rich. As soon as we get it regulated and we have it labeled, we have it tested, we have consulting, we should look at it as a new business model, it's heritage of mankind. The plant's heritage of mankind. And you go to a drugstore, like the old drugstores, drogerie, you go there, you can get plants, you have a consulting person there, you get everything you need. So that's where cannabis belongs to. In Austria, you have the CBD shop. CBD is legal, but not in food and not there, and it's novel food regulation and stuff. So people sell CBD, and they should be able to do that, and they should, also be able to sell regular weed and learn about it and teach the people to do it. It's yeah.
But I did not say there is no lobby. I mentioned police, for example, that's also a lobby against us, but there is no multi-billion euro lobby against us. That's what I meant. And that's what I still think in Germany. I said traffic policy, you've got on the other side the car industry with billions of revenue every year, pushing a lot of lobby power into the parliaments and so on. And you don't have that kind of lobby in the cannabis legalization field, except the pharma lobby in the medical field, but only medical. In Germany, at least, I don't see pharma lobbying against recreational legalization in Germany.
Well,
that's what I meant. The only ones who earn money with the status quo and do not want legalization are illegal dealers, and they are not organized like a professional lobby influencing politicians in an organized way. That's what I meant.
That's an excellent point. And I think that kind of transitions us nicely into the next kind of section of discussion around like medical and recreational advocacy and kind of the distinction that we see there. So I guess I'd like to know from all of you what your views on this are, and whether there is this arbitrary division between medical and recreational cannabis across Europe at the moment. I'd be very keen to hear your thoughts, and kind of adding on to that, whether that distinction is harmful or necessary in advancing reform. But yeah, Nicole, you look like you're quite keen to speak.
Yeah, definitely. This is a tricky one, because I think personally, I just can't understand why anyone would want to put differing labels on the exact same natural commodity. Cannabis is a wellness tool first and foremost, not a vice. Sure, it can definitely be processed into a medical product that's produced by a medical company, or it can be overconsumed by a group of teenagers, but that doesn't change the inherent qualities of the plant and of the flower itself. And whether it's harmful or not, I mean, as I've said, the intent of use is on the individual, and the vast majority of the time that intent is therapeutic relief. Like Derek said, it's therapeutic. And I can understand, though, however, that there is a real urgent issue of very sick children, very sick adults who do need access to this medicine urgently. That needs to be a focus, but I feel it is harmful to differentiate between the two, because, as I've said, cannabis is a wellness tool. It's not a vice. It should be treated as a wellness product, and intent of use is on the user. It's not on the plant, and the plant should be treated for what it is.
Yeah, I think it's the problem is that medical cannabis and recreational cannabis, for me, it's not to be connected. Because on one side, you go to the pharmacies, they are for sick people, there's the medicine. And the recreational cannabis is a different pair of shoes, So like, for example, if you have the capsaicin, the chili pepper, you can get it in the pharmacies. You have these things, the patches you put on, and it's used as medicine. It's also used like a weapon, in the sprays used by the police, and you can eat it, So it falls under 3 different regulations, and it's the same basic product, but used differently. And so I think, I do not want cannabis. I mean, I don't know. I do not want cannabis in the hands of the pharmaceutical industry, because it would be like, they add a lot of money. It would be a big loss for the product, for the productivity, for the of a country. The prices would be far too high, not available for everybody, and it's a plant that grows everywhere. So why should you prohibit it? I don't see that. Yeah.
I agree with you on that point, but just to briefly mention, my big kind of thing recently has been looking at surveys from legal markets and the reasons as to why adults on an adult use market actually purchase cannabis. All the reasons are therapeutic. I mean, it's to help with sleep, it's to help with anxiety, it's to help with depression, to help with relaxation. And those are all therapeutic reasons. So what we're getting a lot out of Ireland is people now saying, before they would say no, cannabis, no whatsoever. But now they're saying, okay, I'm in favor of medical cannabis, but not recreational. And that's kind of like almost like a hierarchy of needs, like saying one person's need is above another. It's no, this product should be available for everyone who needs it. And I absolutely agree, right to grow at home for me is the biggest thing, because I have no interest really in funding pharmaceutical companies. I would much rather grow what I need personally at home and be in complete control of the product that I'm going to be consuming at the end. And as Derek mentioned, like I use cannabis for wellness reasons, to relax, but also to help me with my anxiety and chronic pain. And I don't want to feel like I'm somewhere in the middle going, who do I go to? Do I go the medical side or the recreational side? It's no, I like cannabis. Cannabis helps me. I want to be right in the middle. So I just hope that helps to clear up just where I'm coming from, that it's used for therapeutic reasons and it should be approached that way, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think there's sometimes it can be very difficult to distinguish between what is pain relief and what is enjoyment. Like the two very much go hand in hand. And obviously there is a certain hierarchy that, people in extreme amounts of pain and that are, severely ill need cannabis to survive. But I think otherwise kind of being in favor of medical and not recreational, I think it's just quite a strange distinction to make.
Well, it's also in the pharmacies, they use highly concentrated monosubstances. Yeah. Because, pharmaceutical companies work with monosubstances, it's much easier for them. And the entourage effect of the real weed is something that doesn't exist for the pharmaceutical companies. That's nothing they are used to.
I think you can have two point of views on that issue. One is the one of a philosopher, let's say. What is cannabis, and does it make sense to divide it in medicine and something to be high on? It's the same like industrial hemp and cannabis, which with much THC. In former times, there was nothing like industrial hemp. It was is a man-made difference. What then the growers put more and more into different directions, led by the law, turning them to make that division. So everybody should be able to use it. We are. I think there's no difference between us on that. But you can also look on the issue from a point of strategy, political strategy. And that's something completely different. You can then still say, well, everybody should have it, and it doesn't make sense to divide it in medicine and industrial something and something to be high on. It is something people have a very different view on. Like Nicole said, it's the same in Germany. A couple of years ago, when we had only 30% of the people in Germany in favor of legalization completely of recreational drug, but more than 80% on the same time to get access to medical cannabis. And so would you like to wait then when there's no political majority to legalize it completely? Would you wait 10 or 20 years before you give the patient their medicine? No, you wouldn't. So on a practical base, you do it, you make the decision and you push for, well, okay, then let's start with medical thing at least. And let's discuss the other thing then further on. So I think there is a point where you must leave the view of the philosopher and look what is possible right now.
Well, Georg, but then it's good to be divided. You know, if you say you want medical cannabis, then go for medical cannabis and leave the recreational aside. Because if it's medical cannabis for patients, you know, this medical cannabis that's being radiated and blah, 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 you get in the pharmacies, then actually this is not available for recreational consumers. So if you want to go for medical cannabis, go. But the recreational cannabis is like, well, if you call it philosophy, it's a human right, you know, it's a plant that grows and it's available for everybody. So of course the patients should have high concentrated, very well controlled cannabis for their diseases. But we are adults, and non-problematic adult use of cannabis is a human right. That's
sure, it is. That's my main reason why I'm doing all this shit here, because it's an issue of civil rights. But that doesn't help you if there is no majority in the parliament. You can discuss that, you can say it again and again and again. And maybe in 10 years we are at the goal and people understood that in a majority. But as long as that is not the case, well, you stand there and have to cope with the reality. Maybe one more thing. We had in Germany interesting discussion or issue, however. We have a very strong association for medical cannabis also. Like some of you probably know Franjo Grotenherrn, who is also worldwide one of the leading experts on medical cannabis. And this movement is also a little bit fearing that if you combine the issues too much, it could be a problem to go forward with medical. And I always respected that and saying, well, okay, that's fine. If the majority is there for this and not for my issue, I've still got to fight and it's still okay to leave them their issue. And always also when I was talking to politicians, they also have that fear, like Christian Democrats. They say, well, you might be right, medicine is fine, no problem. But if we open that door, complete legalization is going to come. We don't want that. That's dangerous. And I always say to them, well, it's your decision. You are the parliamentarian, not I am. You have the decision. If you say legalize it as medical, fine. If you don't like it as recreational, you don't have to. It's your decision.
But if you just look, it happened time and time again in the United States, that you start with medical and then people see the sky doesn't fall down first. And second, they then maybe have someone they know that benefits very much from medical cannabis, and people aren't stupid. Then they can understand, well, if it's the same plant that my nephew is smoking, but my aunt is now using against chemotherapy shit, for instance, then they understand that they have been lied to. Basically, what Sanjay Gupta famously said on CNN. The American people have been lied to about cannabis. Well, it goes for the whole world, basically. Everybody has been lied to about cannabis. And I agree with your strategic point. Just to help things along, it's very good to focus on this. I can remember that back in the 90s, in the American activism movement, there was a big divide between people that said, we have to go for medical first, and people that said, I am not a patient. I just want to get high. Let's not put medical first. But then you can see now that history has proven the people right that have chosen to go medical first, because no politician can stand up against somebody in a wheelchair that says, this is the quality of my life that you're taking away from me. You cannot say no to that. So I would also say in this respect, you have to be a bit opportunistic and let's go medical first and then the CDU and CSU politicians in Germany, they are right. We are opening up the door to full legalization, which is of course a good thing.
And maybe one last comment on that, if I can. Look to other drugs. Many of us are drug politicians, not only cannabis politicians, and say prohibition is a problem at all, not just with cannabis. And it's coincidentally that cannabis has a very big medical use. You have other drugs we should also kind of legalize with less medical use. That's one point. And the other is this division between medical use and drug use is usual. It's the same with opiates. It's the same with some amphetamine type stimulants. So that's nothing new. That you have those two kinds of usage and approach with the law.
If I can add something on the situation in Italy with regard to this point, I think that everybody is saying that, of course, we agree that cannabis should be fully legalized with no distinction. The issue is how we get there. And so it is up to the local situation, I would say, to choose the right way. I mean, I just bring my experience in Italy. In Italy, medical is legal, but medical is very strict. So it is very well defined what is medical. But still, this helps people to fight the stigma, because as somebody said, I mean, you see that it's something good. And we had some very famous public cases of sick people that went on all newspapers. And so you begin to associate cannabis with something good. So I think that the other issue is that if in Italy we would have insisted to keep the two things together, today we wouldn't have cannabis for sick people at all. And it is so true that it's a tactical issue, is that now in Italy we are living the same experience again, because there is this proposal of law for domestic cultivation, which is, of course, is very partial. It's not full legalization. And still, we are opening the debate, we should go for full legalization. But we are in favor of this limited law, because, again, it's a step after step. People will see that if you cultivate domestically cannabis, nobody dies. Maybe you go in a house and you see that these people has cannabis plants and it's not a criminal. So I think that the position is the same for everybody, but we should find the fastest path to get to the final result. And in Italy, we are trying to, we heavily sustain this very partial and imperfect law as a further step to legalization.
I think we need much more research being done for cannabis, and the treaties allow cannabis for research. So why don't the countries have more projects, research projects, where they also, they from the beginning, they say it's an ongoing process. It can fail, but this failure will not be the end. Let's learn from it and let's develop, And so I see cannabis as a different, I see a business model that's based on, social and fairness, and where people can have their new jobs. It's a new field. They have new jobs, they have new approach, and they work for research. That's what I see. I mean, the medical is the medical, yes, but then we need the recreational too.
Yeah, and I think it's quite a difficult line to draw. I think that there's a very good point in this discussion around the fact that medical has kind of opened up the doors to seeing cannabis more positively, which I think is definitely kind of true. And it's kind of that kind of domino effect that once you open up medical use, you realize that, I think Derek said, the sky doesn't fall. So I think that's very, very kind of interesting discussion around it, and I can see kind of both points of view around it. as I'm kind of aware of time, I think it would be nice to move on to just discussing a little bit about the changing face of advocacy. And I'd be quite keen to hear what you guys think about what successful advocacy looks like in 2021, and whether the kind of model for cannabis advocacy has changed over the kind of last few years, whether the way we're kind of framing cannabis reform has changed or needs to change, and what all of you think is the kind of best way to approach reform positively and collaboratively.
Yeah, well, I can share one lesson that was learned to me by a very well-paid lobbying organization in The Hague, our center of government here in the Netherlands. And they said that for any lobby, 80% of your time should be devoted to your internal lobby, meaning getting to know what is your goal and what you are lobbying for exactly. And then the 20% that's left, you go out to the politicians and to the media and to everybody. So maybe for cannabis, it's a bit of a different percentage, but I thought it was a very interesting idea. And this is what I think is, yeah, I can mention ECAN, for instance, but I can also mention ENCOT. It's very important that you have these organizations that you just share your information and your experience, and that you just try to make the circle bigger, you know, and then you can become stronger. It's all about information. I think Guido said already at the start, this is all about information, collecting it, presenting it, putting it out there. If I speak from our own experience here in the Netherlands, we had, of course, Cannabis Liberation Day Festival, which was very useful to rally people and to get media attention, but also very much to just make the community stronger and to introduce people to one another and to get easier funding, because people know that you are actually doing something that they can see and enjoy. And I think this is very important for activists, that I think they should engage with the cannabis industry, because there is a cannabis industry, whether it's only rolling papers, you know, there's a lot of money made with cannabis. And one of the tricks I think you have to learn as a cannabis activist is go out there, go into that space, dance with the devil, as my old and deceased colleague Joep Ome used to say. So be very aware of what can go wrong, and that you're not corrupted by it, and that you're not selling bullshit literally or figuratively, but you need them. And if you don't do it, you will be very much in a very small circle and getting very, very few results. So this would be my advice for like modern day activism. Engage the businesses, but be very transparent about it and try to build a community. And digitally, it's very easy compared to the days before the internet.
That's a very difficult question. No? So how we step change in advocacy, and yes, I think it's very important what each of us are doing already, which is trying to inform, to talk, of course, but. We as many associations, we are always fighting with the issue how we step change our communication, and I think that maybe there is a way to try to raise the debate at pan-European level, and who better than me is a supporter of that, because we are a transnational party, so of course we do believe that. But then at the end you know, Europe is already quite a hot topic. So if people tend to say, okay, Europe want to impose to Italian people, to French people, something from outside, it may be even dangerous. What I'm really thinking about is that I think the United States is I think they broke the wall. No, so it's now all the states. Very recently, the New York State with Cuomo decided to legalize. And at least in Italy, I don't know if also in your country, but states are always opening the path for a lot of things. And so I'm really thinking about trying to invite somebody who have an endorsement or have a debate with people from the United States, because at least maybe we are we say provincial, we are very the last part of the empire in Italy. But if something is done in the States, people begin to say, oh, what is happening there? So the reputation is very strong, and law and order is very linked to the United States. So if even the United States are doing something, maybe people will begin to think about that. And I think that definitely it would be a big catch to have an event or a meeting with people from the United States. This would change completely the perception. That's my idea.
No, I think that's an interesting proposition to kind of engage the US a little bit more in European reform, as I think what we're seeing in Europe is kind of what we saw in the US a number of years ago, in that kind of similar wave.
Yeah. Yes, also in terms of experience, I mean, they can witness that people are not dying in the street. So that's enough to say, okay, what is happening in the States? Nothing.
Yeah,
that's already very reassuring for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of links into what Derek was mentioning around it's really important that we can learn from each other and share each other's experiences and developments and move that forward. Does anyone else have any kind of ideas around what successful advocacy looks like in 2021? I think that's going to be one of our final questions, I think, for today's panel, as I'm aware we're kind of short on time.
Just a short reply on the US thing. I recommend not just get them here and talk to them, go there and attend DPA Reform Conference, Drug Policy Alliance. That's an eye-opener, more than 1,000 people, hundreds of professionals and the big associations working on legalization and very detailed workshops with hundreds of attendees. It's really unbelievable. So if you get to finance it somehow, go there. That gave me a lot. And so what is modern advocacy and lobbyism? I'd say if I can make only one point, that's social media. Meanwhile, we have such a strong network that it's a really powerful force. No politician in Germany can talk bullshit about cannabis without getting punished in the social media. That's hundreds of people reacting on it, and we can mobilize people very well. It's on the other hand, it's also positive. If politicians of several parties invite me, I had in the Corona times now, they invite me often to online talks like we do here. 4 different parties invited me to that kind of discussion, and we advertise for it, get into this discussion, look at it, make a question there and so on. And they all say, whoa, many people this time watching, and interesting discussion. Whoa. And then they see, well, that's an issue. That's not only one of the 100 issues we had in the last month. It's one of the top issues, and that really attracts people to come and see our online talk and so on. So mobilize people with social media, I think, is a very important thing.
Yeah, I think social media is one thing, but what we all can do is like talk to our families, talk to our friends, educate the people, get cannabis into education. There's this Italian book, I don't know, Guido, maybe you know it, Nonna Canapa.
Nonna Canapa.
Nonna Canapa, okay.
Perfect.
So that's a children's book, actually. And it's talking about cannabis and how to grow cannabis. And then Selena, she had a seed in there at the end, so you can grow your cannabis. So just get it into your life, You can get the cannabis seeds, the hemp seeds everywhere in every store. There's big advertisements of cosmetics. It's everywhere already, It's everywhere, and people still think, there's still people who could go and say, oh, if I eat these seeds, am I going to be high? Yeah. No, you're not going to be high because it's the seeds. Yeah. And so just teach the people, teach them and talk about it and be normal. And then they find out, oh, you're such a nice person. You smoke weed. Oh my God, I never thought you. Yeah, do it like this. Thanks.
If I can just add to that and give a little example also on the camera, we made this website. It's called in Dutch Veilig Thuiskweken, which means like safe home growing. So we made these flyers for them to use in the coffee shop. But I'm showing it to show you how you can make it like really non-offensive and sort of funny. And I would say for any cannabis activist to just make a website like that, but make sure that there's no advertising on it. So also politicians can see it, and then you can explain to people how to do it. Because there's of course thousands of websites on the internet devoted to growing, but to put it out there as a statement to really empower people and not sell them anything, just give them the advice and include advice on how is the law at this moment in my country. It is illegal to do it, and then give a bit of political story there as well, but really focus on how can you grow safely inside and outside. And if people want to use the content or the idea, feel free to go to the website and do it, because that's what it's made for.
That's an excellent point, Derek, around kind of like the recontextualizing what cannabis actually looks and feels like. Nicole?
Yeah, just to, I mean, I can only echo what everyone else has said, because my main focus is on mobilization through social media. It's so important to empower people with knowledge. And I think the more that we're bombarded with sensational headlines like, oh, cannabis is the gravest threat to mental health, the more it kind of almost shoves people down and tries to put them in a box and shame them into not speaking up. But the only way to combat that is to actually speak up, share our stories, put a face to prohibition, and be like, this is how it affects me. This isn't acceptable. We need to be vocal, and we need to ensure that change, which is coming, will be implemented and implemented properly. I mean, find your support network, create one if you don't have one. Don't be afraid to share your story and demand better policy, because life is too short. Our health and our well-being is far too precious to have the stress of criminalization and consuming unknown products hanging over us. We deserve much better, and we have to fight until we get it.
No, that's yeah, that's an excellent point, Nicole. And to be honest, I'm not sure if anyone else has any more points around the changing face of advocacy, but I think that's actually a really nice way to kind of end and wrap up the panel. That was a very nice kind of a call to action. So yeah, so with that said, I guess that I think that kind of concludes our European advocacy panel today at the GCI virtual summit. So I'd just like to extend a massive thank you to all five of you for it's been a really insightful discussion. It's been really interesting kind of hearing your expertise on the current state of cannabis advocacy across Europe, and kind of guiding the nuance and the complexity of distinguishing this sector, especially around medical and recreational, and what advocacy looks like. So yeah, massive thank you to all of you. It's been an excellent discussion, and always a pleasure to speak to you all.